Chapter 8. To be a beetle or a dragon. Pain shot through Clover as a knife attempted to enter his leg, though it was stopped by the scales that formed as a result of Gram's powers. The pain was still real and immense. Grinding his teeth to distract himself from the pain, he lifted the man into the air by his neck. The man seemed focused on his now bent knife, until Clover tightened his grip.
"What will you do now, Clover?"
Gram asked in his overly smug tone. Clover met the man's gaze. He reeked of alcohol and cigarette smoke, a lowlife who had been in the gutter his whole life and caused nothing other than suffering. "You got a family?" Clover asked, trying to avoid noticing any similarities that might close the man's case before the jury had let out. "I got a kid," the man said in a pleading tone as he helplessly grabbed at Clover's arms and hands. "Does it love you? I'll know if you're lying." A slight bluff. In reality, Clover couldn't read minds. However, with what the man had just witnessed, the lie would most likely be enough to keep him straight. "No, she lives with her ma," the man admitted, his desperate attempts to free himself slowing to a stop. "I was stealing to pay my child support, so I can visit her again." Regardless of whether it was the result of selfish fear or some genuine love the man held, Clover couldn't help but notice the tears forming in the man's eyes. "Go home, get a job and straighten yourself out. You won't do any good for your daughter if you're locked up or dead," Clover said. In the man's eye, Clover could see himself, a frightening image that Clover himself was a little intimidated by. "Thank you," the man said. His tone was still that of a man begging for his life. "I'll know if you don't do as I said, if you slip back into this, and if I find out that you're back out here, I'll come for you." For a moment, in the image of himself in the man's eyes, he thought he saw blue dragonic eyes peering back at him. "Yes, sir," the man said as Clover put him down. "Now go." Clover felt his voice come out as a growl, but the man got the hint and ran out of the alley.
"He won't improve. Humans are things of habit,"
Gram said, displeasure clear in his voice. "I didn't do it for him. I did it for his kid."
"You might have very well done the hatchling a disservice by letting him draw breath. It's not as if she will be benefited by having such a deadbeat teaching her to fly."
Clover thought about this. It was true that the child in question might very well be better off without his influence, but Clover pitied the man and hoped to be proven wrong. "Doesn't matter. We should get home. I have to make Annie and Steven their lunches for morning," Clover said, rubbing the place on his leg the man had stabbed him. The pain was definitely still there, but he was becoming used to it. The pain of the strikes to his body and the forming of the scales no longer left him in agonizing pain.
"I just don't see how he was different from the other people whose blood you spilled,"
Gram commented. Clover disliked the fact he had valid points. "I saw it in his eyes. Sometimes people are just desperate and don't know what else to do. He just needed some motivation to do better," Clover said, unsure how much he believed his own words. He could have become like that man, under the right circumstances, in another life, for Annie and Steven.
"Are you one of those people?"
Gram's needlessly insightful question annoyed Clover. "Who knows? I'm pretty sure all of us humans are desperate in our own ways." Clover wondered if those words were also false. The people with power and influence, the rich, the lucky, were they just as desperate as him?
"Yet here you are, with all the power you could want, and less will to use it than a slug upon a rock,"
Gram said, sending a mental smirk into Clover's mind. "I just want to ensure a good life for my siblings. I just want to accumulate money and clean up the streets," Clover said, opening his front door.
"Such pitiful goals." You have yet to reach the bottom of the well of power I could grant you. You could do the unimaginable. In the current world, with what has become of this once great land of magic and mystery, you could destroy the world, wipe it away, and create it anew.
Clover was surprised at the conviction in Gram's tone and the length of his statement. That's not my goal, Gram. But if the world ever came between those two and happiness, then I would take you up on that, Clover said truthfully. Clover walked to the stairs, ignoring the screaming coming from the kitchen. His mother and the drunk were still up, but he was sure they would tire themselves out and pass out soon enough. Guess that's a no-go for dinner, Clover thought to himself. Clover quietly walked up the stairs, as to not be noticed. But a hailstorm of anger bubbled up from Gram that stopped Clover where he stood. "What, Gram?" Clover mumbled to himself.
Tiptoeing around like a sheep, hiding from sight like a mouse frightened of an owl. All this when you have everything you would need to cement yourself as the alpha in this household. Perhaps you cannot leave with your nestmates yet, but force your elders to fear you enough to not hinder you.
"Shut up!" Clover yelled to Gram. However, the yelling in the kitchen stopped. "Crap," Clover mumbled to himself. Looking towards the kitchen, he saw his mother peeking her head out from the kitchen, as useless as usual, and the drunk already halfway from the kitchen to where he was on the stairs. Clover knew that with his newfound speed and strength, the power given to him by Gram, that he could clear the distance between his stepfather and himself and put him on his back with one punch. But he did not. Clover accepted the bony man, grabbing him by the hair and throwing him halfway down the stairs, looking down at him like a drunken, lazy king upon his subjects. And the worst thing was that given the last years of Clover's life, that wasn't an incorrect assessment. "Do we have a problem, boy?" The smell of beer was strong on the man's breath. "No more than usual, Craig," Clover said. The blow to his head shook him more than hurting him, as another glance to his mother showed she hadn't moved an inch at the assault. "Weird. I thought you told me to shut up. That's disrespectful," Craig said, walking down the stairs towards Clover. "And screaming at the top of your lungs isn't disrespectful?" Clover said, with his best sarcastic smirk, the same kind of comment that had a beer bottle hurling itself towards him days before. "I'm about sick of your disrespect. I wouldn't be let off so easily for that when I was a boy," Craig said, vitriol in his tone. Again Craig grabbed Clover's hair and jerked his head up by his scalp, one of the drunk's favorite ways to show his superiority. "I'm about sick of the self-righteous BS that comes out of your mouth," Clover said, meeting the man's eyes. The pulling of Clover's hair brought the memory of the last time this happened to the forefront of his mind, an exchange where Craig ended up ripping a good clump of hair from his head, the reason he shaved half of his hair. "Say that again," Craig demanded, tightening his grip on Clover's head.
A mouse hides his words. A beetle tries to blend into the scenery. But a dragon roars for all to hear. A dragon shines brightly in the sky. And a dragon makes those around him pray.
The anger from Gram flowing into Clover. "Who are you?" Craig asked Clover. A line of questioning that usually didn't end until Clover admitted his lack of worth in face of Craig's abuse. This time, however, Clover said nothing.
That anger isn't mine, Clover. Your heart wants to scream out. The roar within you wants to echo throughout the land. Don't let such a small man quail your voice.
Gram was right. The anger was Clover's. He was angry. Angry that this man had been allowed to mistreat himself and his siblings for so long. "Who are you?" Craig repeated. his hold becoming harder once more. Clover felt the heat boiling up from within him, and smirked, blowing a small jet of black flames in Craig's face. Not the inferno he had unleashed at the store, just enough to gently burn the man's face and incinerate his facial hair. "Shut up already, and go pass out in a corner." Craig recoiled, releasing Clover's hair and falling on his backside. "I pay the bills so you can laze around this shithole and drink yourself to death. So don't screw with me again unless you want it to get really ugly," Clover said, grabbing the man by his remaining hair and blowing a mouthful of smoke into his face. He felt Gram's amusement, but chose to let the sword have this one as he turned to go upstairs. "And Craig, if you think this was bad, if you ever touch or speak to Annie or Steven again, next time will be way worse," Clover said, looking at the man with the most threatening look he could manage, a few flecks of flames coming from his nostrils. He knew, given the chance, that Craig would take the frustration stemming from his inferiority complex out on them. Two children that were easy victims for him, and while he was allowing his roar to be heard, he would at least ensure they would be all right. Clover lingered on the stairs for a moment, ensuring Craig understood. When he was satisfied, Clover went to his room, where he found Annie and Steven sitting. Annie was showing Steven how to play old maid on the floor next to Clover's bed. She acted so carefree, but Clover knew the truth. She was trying to distract Steven from the chaos downstairs. Annie probably thought shielding Steven from their situation was her duty as his big sister. She was only 12, but Clover feared she had already seen too much already. Protecting them was his duty, after all, and one he'd failed at so far. Clover knelt down to them and placed a hand on each of their heads, ruffling their hair. Steven accepted this, a happy 6-year-old, but Annie gave a dramatic huff about her hair being messed up. "It's quiet," Annie said in a cautious but optimistic tone. "We heard yelling and crashing," Steven mumbled. From an early age, Steven had been a quiet boy. Clover assumed this was the result of the environment he had been raised in. He wasn't Craig's child, but he was the result of the stepfather before Craig. Indeed, all three of them were the fruits of different men their mother had snared, each worse than the last. "Yeah, we talked it out. They should be quiet for the night." A lie. A lie Clover knew Annie caught. Clover was filled with sadness. He was repulsed by the fact he had to lie to them, disgusted by the fact that Annie was roped into the lies. But he didn't know how else to protect them. "You talked it out?" Steven asked skeptically, pulling a card from Annie's hand and placing a pair of 2s on the table. "Yeah, if he gets loud when I'm not around, tell him that you'll tell me about it," Clover said, keeping his and Annie's unbroken eye contact.
She's a bright one. She sees right through your deception,
Gram said with a purr. "Yeah, she's way too smart for this dump." Clover agreed. Steven seemed to accept this, but Annie clearly knew something was up. "You're hardly ever home anyways," Steven said. The truth behind that filled Clover with sadness and anxiety. "Why am I anxious?" Clover stood up, realizing the anxiety wasn't his, but rather Gram's.
"Go to the back of your house, now,"
Gram demanded without a note of deception. So with a smile and another rub to their heads, Clover ran to the backyard. Clover slammed out of the back door of his house. In the middle of the yard, mostly veiled by the darkness of night, was a man clad in black. A man wielding a sword.
"Beware, this is no man. He shouldn't be much trouble, but will match you far more than the other voles you have battled with until now,"
Gram warned, a strange change for him. "I've got this. Hitting something might burn off some of this stress," Clover said as his dark assailant rushed at him, The thing running him down was far faster than anyone in this hood, nearly as fast as an Olympic athlete. Clover swung at his attacker as he neared, but was far too slow, his attacker stabbing him in the abdomen with its sword.
Fire.
Clover didn't hesitate. He had already taken lives, and this guy was working his nerves. Die! Clover yelled, sending a torrent of blackened inferno at his attacker that dwarfed any he had unleashed previously, sending the black-clad man flying into the alley behind his home. Damn, that hurt my throat, Clover thought. His throat burned, and his tongue itched, and the grass in his yard was all but ash.
Don't get distracted. You'll have time to lick your wounds later. I've prevented any real damage to you.
Gram chastised. I know, Gram, Clover said as he cautiously approached the place he had seen the man fall. As Clover neared, he saw no signs of the person he was fighting, other than a few piles of ash that blew helplessly in the breeze. Where did...
Duck down, you fool.
Gram interrupted as Clover felt an immense blow to his back that sent him stumbling forwards. Pain filled Clover as his foot caught something on the ground and he fell. Faster next time, Gram, Clover said harshly under his breath, as immense pain filled his right hand as the man's sword was jabbed into it. Clover looked to his hand. To his surprise, the sword went through his hand, anchoring it in place. But how? Clover thought out loud. Am I going to die here? Clover wondered as the man grabbed the back of Clover's head.
I promised you power, and now you shall bear witness to the full extent of it.
Gram said as the weight of the necklace disappeared from Clover's neck, and Clover's dominant left hand felt the hard smoothness of leather wrapped around metal.
Rise. Do not ignore your pain and anxieties. Instead, allow them to fuel you, to propel you through whatever battles you may face.
Heat rose in the depths of Clover's heart. His body felt like a living inferno and rolled to the side, allowing the dark entity's sword to cut itself out of his hand, freeing him. The world was a blur of blues and grays, the darkness of the night little more than a gloom upon the land. Clover looked to the man rushing from down once more. He seemed noticeably slower than before, a gentle blue hue radiating around him and the blood still seeping from Clover's mangled hand. Clover pulled back the dazzling black and silver sword and swung. The collision of Clover's blade on his, knocking him backwards. The thing before him got to its feet quickly, but it made little difference to Clover, for he knew the results of this conflict already. He would kill this thing in front of him. Clover swung his sword in the air, sending a wave of blazing black and red flames at his victim, who turned into a cloud of black butterflies, most of which fell back to the ground, burning.
Grab one so we can deduce who sent this unnatural abomination to kill you.
Gram said, as Clover grabbed one of the fleeing butterflies out of the air. Clover felt the black insect wriggling between his fingers. Unlike the other bugs he had seen, it didn't seem to have an exoskeleton or anything resembling a head. It was one solid black mass with obsidian-colored wings. Weird little thing, Clover said offhandedly, as Gram once again turned into a necklace.
Fey magic is usually troublesome.
Gram responded as Clover's sight returned to normal, a note of disdain lingering in Gram's tone. I'll put it in a jar when we get back inside, but after that, I'm going to help Annie with the homework I'm sure she's ignoring. Clover said, turning on his heel.
Recent events would suggest further troubles will find you.
Gram said, Clover had come to the same conclusion, but it was nothing Clover couldn't handle.